You're telling me that I could go give my life up for my country, or potentially kill for my country, and I'm not old enough to smoke a joint? Because if they let you go in the military at 18 and don't grant you the privileges of being adult, isn't that child abuse?
I'm watching it, as an American over here in the UK, and I don't even recognize that country to a certain extent.
The United States is completely divided right now. And I like to brag and say, I'm the only one who can bring us back together. It's a two-party dictatorship, is what you have.
How did you go from wrestling to acting, and how did you get the gig on Predator?
She's casting the next Schwarzenegger film. There's a part in there you're perfect for. 6'4", 250-pound killer. Well, I hate to brag, but that's kind of what I was a few years earlier in my life. She looked me up and down twice, and she had me read the part in the helicopter where I offer everybody tobacco, and I go, a bunch of slack-jawed faggots around here. What the hell is that? And they said, well, that's a helicopter minigun. Can you shoot it by hand? They said, nobody has ever done it. Jesse Ventura can. Give us both of them. You're going to shoot a bow and call me a carnival act? Well, get ready, because I'm going to shoot one right back over your deck. We'll see how you can take it. There's a quote about the Navy SEALs. We don't get mad, we get even.
What's your message for America, for the world? What do you think is the way forward?
I just wish with all my heart that we'd listen to John Lennon and give peace a chance.
Why do you get emotional when you say that, Governor?
Because I served. I dreamed for the day, that old cliche, when they give a war and nobody shows. Let them throw a war and have nobody show up.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Governor Jesse Ventura, the former professional wrestler turned actor, author, and politician. As a young man, you joined the Navy SEALs as part of Underwater Demolition Team 12 and served your country in the Vietnam War before being honorably discharged in 1975. You then started your career as a professional wrestler, soon becoming one of the most recognizable faces in the world of sport, fighting under the nickname The Body, and later being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. During that time, you starred in Hollywood blockbusters like Predator and The Running Man, while in 2009, you began hosting the popular TV show Conspiracy Theory. In the mid-90s, you ventured into the world of politics, which culminated in you being elected governor of Minnesota in 1998, beating both the Republican and the Democratic nominees. You believe that the two-party system is unfair and damaging to American politics, and you speak openly about the downfall of the American media, suggesting the mainstream news is nothing more than entertainment. Governor Ventura, welcome to London Real.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's always fun to talk to the people across the pond.
Great to have you here, Governor. I wanted to start and just say, kind of on the back of a lot of the censorship we were feeling in 2020, and what was I was watching this city that I love, my adopted city of London, being locked down. I decided to run for mayor, and I had no experience in politics. I ran as an independent candidate. I spent 7 months. I drove 5,000 miles through this city, and in the end, I lost. But somewhere deep down inside, I was inspired by you, because I never studied politics, never wanted to be in politics, but I was sick and tired of this two-party system and no change, and I went for it. Honestly, I don't know about you, but I got a PhD in how the political system worked, and the media, it was not the prettiest thing to watch, but I'm glad I did it because I love this city and I want to see the best for it. So I guess I got you to thank for that. You ever look back on your time in politics and feel like you got a really serious education in the two-party system when you dove in there? Or what are your memories from that time?
Oh, absolutely. The first thing you learn is how the deck is rigged against you. And the next thing you learn that I learned was, oh yeah, in front of the public, they're enemies, the Democrats and Republicans. But behind the scenes, if a third entity enters the fray, those two parties will jump in bed together to destroy the third entity. I'll give you the example. When I became governor of Minnesota, I had a Democratic-controlled Senate and I had a Republican-controlled House. For 3 years, it worked pretty well. Whichever side I sided with generally prevailed, because then it was 2-1. I was the ultimate independent. I didn't have a dog in the fight as far as between the Democrats and Republicans per se. But if I agreed with the Democratic position, they usually prevailed. If I agreed with the Republican position, they usually prevailed. Till the third year, the election year, I was required to submit the budget as the governor, which I did. Then the Democrats and Republicans jumped in bed together, got rid of my budget, came forward with their own. Their budget was fiscally irresponsible, what they did, so I vetoed it. It went back to them again. They overrode my veto twice, which was all I could do. And then that budget was implemented. Well, they thought they were going to hang me with this horrible budget, but I fooled them. I didn't run again. So they got stuck with their budget. And the very next year, at the end of their budget, we had a $5 billion deficit because of their fiscal irresponsibility and their attempt to get me politically.
Right.
But I fooled them. I didn't run. And they ended up stuck with it. And then they had to scramble around and fix all the things they did. And the reason I say that is to tell people this. The United States is completely divided right now. And I like to brag and say, I'm the only one who can bring us back together. Because if I got elected president within 3 years, you'd see the Democrats and Republicans in bed together singing Kumbaya to oppose me. And that would thus heal the United States of America, wouldn't it? At least temporarily.
It's an interesting point because you saw this division early on. Obviously, it's magnified tremendously in the last 25 years to where I'm watching it, as an American over here in the UK, and I don't even recognize that country to a certain extent because it's so divided. Did you always only want to serve one term, or was that something you ended up having to do because of this collusion?
No, there were multiple reasons I didn't seek a second term. People forget that I was a mayor first.
Yeah.
I ran for mayor in 1990 of the sixth largest city in Minnesota, first ring suburb of Minneapolis, Brooklyn Park. So I had 4 years of experience governing at the truly ground level. That's where you learn. Try being a mayor, because as a mayor, you have to have a council meeting every week. And you know who's sitting out there? All the citizens. You have to look them eye to eye on a weekly basis. There's where the governing is, right there. You learn from that. Then when you get to governor, well, then you're isolated. You don't ever see the public face to face unless you want to, and then it's even worse as you get up at the federal level, and all that. But see, I had the experience of being at the ground level as a mayor before I became governor, and then watching how they manipulate to stop the third parties. They will always raise the bar. Like if they used what they require today, I could not even run, because today they require 10% to be considered major party. That's what they're deciding in Minnesota now. They're raising it up. Well, I was only polling 9% at the primary.
Right.
And in 6 weeks, I won the election. Why? I was allowed to debate.
Yeah.
I got to be in the debates. The moment I went in the debates, it was a meteoric rise. They couldn't stop me then. They tried to cancel debates. They did everything they could because they saw the writing on the wall. The first debate, I made this huge, and I carried it right through to November, caught them. They weren't prepared for it. I upset the apple cart because, and I can't say I did it. You know who really did it? The people of Minnesota.
Yeah. Yeah.
The people of Minnesota said, we've had enough. We're going to send a message. And they did.
You're giving me flashbacks, Governor, because at the time when I was running, the bookies, the betting agents here had me as second place for mayor of London. And the BBC went to have a debate. And I thought, well, this is fantastic. They invited 6 people to the debate, but not me. Right?
Yeah, well, then you piss somebody off.
Yeah. And that's when I started learning how the media, strangely, was co-opted into keeping the status quo of the two-party system. And I trying to figure out, I'm like, well, why? They're not part of the system, not getting paid. But for them to keep that whole thing going, to keep the sources of information flowing, it's in everyone's interest to keep out these pesky voices of independent parties. And so they literally engineered me out of it. Our favorite BBC here, which is basically a propaganda arm for the government, engineered me right out of it. And it was fascinating. It's like I didn't exist in the news, but I existed everywhere else.
Well, here's where I had the advantage over you. When I talk, it's ratings.
Right.
So the media didn't run from me. They ran to me.
Right. Right.
Because when I spoke, they got jumps in their ratings.
Right.
You know, and that's the difference between I love to brag about this. Do you know how much money I raised to become governor of the state of Minnesota?
How much?
Well, first I'm going to tell you a story. My dad was a World War II veteran, 6 bronze battle stars in Europe, right? And one day I came home and my dad said to me when I was a teenager, he said, you know, my dad says, and he only had an 8th grade education, laborer. My dad says to me, all politicians are crooks. And I looked at my dad, and I was old enough, and I said, come on, Dad, you can't make a blanket statement like that. They can't all be crooks. He goes, yes, they are. I said, how? Why? Why do you say they're all crooks? And his simplistic answer was so good. He goes, they're all crooks because they spend $1 million for a job that only pays $100,000. Nobody would spend $1 million for a job that only pays $100,000. Well, to end my story, I only raised to become governor of Minnesota $300,000. That's all I raised. I made $120,000 a year for 4 years. That means I made $480,000 and I only spent $300,000. That means if my dad would have been alive, I could have said to my dad, your son is not a crook because I'm making more money doing the job than what I spent to get it.
And that tells you everything you need to know about the system. And nowadays, there's so much money involved. I mean, on that runoff election in Georgia you guys had a while back, it was like, I don't know the number, but it staggered me. It was like hundreds of millions of dollars being spent for that one seat on the runoff. Do you know
why I laugh at it?
Why?
Because I laugh and go, if I were running, I wouldn't have to spend 1/10 of that amount of money. I wouldn't have to spend zilch. If I ran for president now, just allow me in the debates. If you allow me in the debates, if I use the old cliche against the Democrats and Republicans, if I can debate them, I can beat them. Because, see, I don't run against the opponent. I run against the two parties. I don't even say the opponent's name, usually. I talk about strictly the two parties, how corrupt they are, and it's a two-party. I quote my friend Ralph Nader. When I say it's a two-party dictatorship, is what you have. It's a two-party dictatorship.
Are you going to run for president?
Probably not. I dabbled with the Green Party because really all I need is ballot access. Find me people that have ballot access in all 50 states, and I'll do the rest. I tried the Green Party. It was a disaster. They don't know where they're going. They're divided in two. It would have required me to first fix the Green Party and then take on the Democrats and Republicans. Not even I could do that, Frank. I need to have a party behind me that's focused. And that's what I had in Minnesota with what we were then the Independence Party of Minnesota. We later affiliated with Ross Perot's Reform Party, but then we disaffiliated with them later when we realized they weren't a true third-party movement. They were just Ross Perot. And so we went back to being the Independence Party of Minnesota.
Governor, I saw you give a pretty passionate speech to, I believe it was maybe the Minnesota Assembly. I'm not sure what it was. On the day, I think that they were going to finally legalize medical marijuana, and it was powerful.
No, recreational.
Oh, recreational, right? They'd already done the medical. Can you talk about what you said? Why that moment was really important for you to be there, and how that subject touched your life so much?
Absolutely. First and foremost, it wasn't a full assembly. It was the committee, a couple of the committees I went to. And I laugh about it because I actually spent more time in the Senate and House buildings doing the marijuana stuff than I did 4 years as governor. Because when I was governor, they'd come to me. I didn't have to go over there. They'd come over to me. But no, what got me involved was this. About a decade ago, the First Lady of Minnesota, the 38th, my wife Terry, developed late-in-life epileptic seizure disorder. She was seizing 2 to 3 times a week. And these were the debilitating seizures where the person is down on the floor, you're holding their head, you're making sure that they can breathe, that their air passages aren't obstructed. You're completely helpless until the seizure does what it's going to do. And you lay there in hopes of not watching the person you love most in the world die in your arms. That's how I felt. Well, what did we do? We went to the doctors. The doctors put my wife on 4 different seizure medications through pharma, one after the other, after the other, after the other. None of them worked. They all had horrible side effects. We were desperate, and we were reading how marijuana or cannabis was helping these epileptic children who were getting seizures. So I have my home in Mexico. I have friends from Colorado at the time, which was the first state to lift the prohibition. Hooray to Colorado. They have a place in my heart. They were the ones with the courage and the guts. I tried to do it 20 years ago when I was governor and ran into a brick wall. Anyway, had to drive my wife to Colorado. And it was this bad. She had a seizure in the motel the night before we got there. We get to Colorado. Our friends go in. Now they have cards to get it for them. So they're actually breaking the law to buy from my wife. But they went in and bought for her, and it was liquid, 3 drops under the tongue. They bought enough for her, 3 drops under the tongue, and then they started mailing it to us, so that we could have a supply. My wife has not had a seizure since.
Wow.
Since she took the 3 drops under the tongue. Now, I'm not saying it'll work for everybody. Nothing works for everybody necessarily, but there certainly are other people out there that can be helped and shouldn't have to go through what we went through. Well, then we come back to Minnesota and get it illegally. Minnesota finally legalizes medical. But because they're so restrictive, it costs me $600 a month to keep my wife seizure-free. And insurance won't pay for what works. They gladly pay pharma for all this, excuse my bluntness, bullshit medicine they gave. Oh, we'll pay for that. It don't work, but we'll pay for it. Cannabis, they won't pay for. It was costing me $600 a month. I can't write it off, can't do nothing to keep my wife from having seizures. I almost moved to Colorado because I thought this is the price of a mortgage. I can move out to Colorado, get it for my wife out there for probably $40 a month. Save myself over 500. Well, they've opened up in Minnesota now. Now it's down to 300. And the reason I want the recreational, first and foremost, they shouldn't even divide it up. My good friend Tommy Chong, who knows more about pot than anybody on the planet, Tommy told me that's a mistake because the entire plant is medical. Those that smoke it for the euphoric feeling in the head, they're doing it for mental health. They're doing it to calm down, to relax, or like what I use it for, sleeping. I have nonspecific neuropathy of the feet. In other words, my feet are numb and they can't tell me why. I went to the Mayo Clinic. I can't sleep at night. And everybody tells you today, if you don't get proper sleep, you get all these other bad things happen to you. Well, I can't sleep unless right before bed, I do cannabis, which dulls down my feet problem. And it also works on my post-traumatic stress from the veteran stuff.
Right.
You know, and so both my wife and I have been saved by marijuana, but my wife especially. And all we're asking for is open up the market, treat it like alcohol. And then they talk here. I'm going to bitch now about this. Then they talk about at what age. And they get all these scientists come in and say the human brain keeps developing till age 25 and THC can have an effect on the brain. So to be perfectly safe, you shouldn't let anybody use marijuana till they're 25. My response to that is wait a damn minute. I was 18 years old when I enlisted in the United States Navy. I went at age 19 through Navy SEAL training in Coronado. You know about that.
Mm-hmm.
At age 20, I had deployed to a 9-month deployment, Southeast Asia, and came home from Vietnam. I had been back 1 week, and I went into my executive officer and I said, I want to go back to Vietnam right now. He said, what's the problem? I said, here's the problem. Over there, I'm an adult. Here, I'm a child. Sir, I can assure you I am no longer a child after going to war. And what did I learn from that? We send children to war because we don't grant them the privileges of being adult. You're telling me that I could go give my life up for my country, or potentially kill for my country, and I'm not old enough to smoke a joint? That's what they're saying? I'm not old enough, my poor little brain. Well, what about the brainwashing you get in boot camp? What effect did that have on my undeveloped 18-year-old brain that wasn't developed to age 25 like they're talking about? The bottom line is treat it the same as alcohol. Pick a number and decide when you're an adult. Okay, if you want it to be 21, then you can't go in the military till 21. Because if they let you go in the military at 18 and don't grant you the privileges of being adult, isn't that child abuse? Yeah. Sending children to war?
Do you think 21 should be the age before anyone's allowed to enlist?
No. I think 18 should be.
Okay.
But the point is, make it for everything.
Right.
If you're old enough to serve your country and you're old enough to potentially die for your country or kill for your country's benefit, doesn't that make you an adult?
Yeah.
Because if you're not, then they should be prosecuted for child abuse.
What can you tell us about what you learned, doing the underwater demolition and spending time in Vietnam and that whole experience and what was going on in the country at the time? Like, you've seen something most people haven't.
Well, I was trained by the best. The underwater demolition SEAL team are professionals. You know what your job is. You're highly trained to do your job, and you do it. It's plain and simple. It's a volunteer unit. The attrition rate is probably 75 to 80% of those that try to pass BUDS, which they call Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. 75 to 80% washout in first phase. It's 3 phases. Well, to give an example on the training, the Elite Army Airborne, you've heard of them, the 82nd Airborne, the 101st Airborne, their training's 3 weeks. Ours is 26. Ours is a half a year. You spend a half a year, then you still go to SEER school, Army jump school, SEAL cadre, which was advanced guerrilla warfare, where you're out in an island for 7 weeks, 6 weeks, running ops every day and every night. You learn how to shoot every handheld weapon known to man. And by the way, let's get off track for a minute. Jesse Ventura has a new outlook on the Second Amendment. We have the Second Amendment here in America, and it's the British who are responsible for it. And that's the right to bear arms. Now, why are the Brits responsible? Because 300 years ago, they used to come over here and steal our stuff. You know, they'd come over and walk into houses, take over, steal our stuff. So when the United States was formed, they created the Second Amendment so that every citizen has the right to bear arms. So when the Brits come over to steal your stuff, you can greet them with a gun and stop them. And I'm saying that a bit tongue-in-cheek, Brits. Have some fun with it, but it is the truth.
It's true. It's true.
Anyway, though, we have the right to bear arms, but in light of the shootings that are going on in this country now, the mass killings, my new outlook is this. Yes, anyone can own the weapons, but you got to keep them on your own private property unless you are duly licensed to carry. So there'll be no free weapons out in public lands. Yeah, you can sit in your own backyard on your step and pretend you're Rambo. Do that all you want. I don't care. But if you leave your property with a weapon, you must be duly licensed to carry that weapon off of private property. That way you can still protect your home, which is what the Second Amendment's all about, but it doesn't allow these nutcases to roam the streets with weapons that nobody knows about and they're not licensed to carry. I am licensed to carry. I'm also very well trained, having been a Navy SEAL and everything else. And in fact, I still shot expert with the M16 at age 52 when I was governor.
I like that adaptation on the Second Amendment. I haven't heard of that before until I was preparing for you. And that sounds...
That's a Jesse. That's because Jesse said it.
Yeah. It's
all sorts of new stuff you'll get from Jesse.
It's great stuff. And like you said, it should make everybody happy because you have your rights, but then it also keeps all the madness from happening. And sometimes people can be irresponsible sometimes. And it's like, okay, you have the right to bear arms. You can protect your home. You can do all the good stuff, but it doesn't have to be potentially hurtful.
If you get caught carrying and you're not licensed, we need it to be a stiff penalty.
Right. Okay.
Not no slap on the wrist crap. A stiff one.
Yeah. You mentioned military, and I think a lot of people, when they see you and they see your background, would be surprised when I think you were on the RT, on your show on RT, and Russia invaded Ukraine, and I think you stopped like during the episode and said, I do not support this war. And I think you surprised a lot of people. Can you talk about why you said that and how you feel about war, having even experienced it as a young man?
Well, I'm as anti-war as you can get today because wars solve nothing. When the war is over, nothing is accomplished from them. Look at all the wars we've been in lately. What have we accomplished other than spend trillions of dollars and accomplish nothing? And you know why they don't have me on TV in America? Because here's a question I'll ask. I will ask this question. What is the difference between Russia's invasion of Ukraine and our invasion of Iraq? What's the difference? They were both done for the same thing, regime change. The Russians wanted to govern Ukraine. We wanted Saddam Hussein and his ilk out and establish a new government. The only difference, and then it was based upon lies. Weapons of mass destruction, ties to Al-Qaeda. There was none of that. A complete lying. And we were lied to in the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Another lie. They lied to put you in war. That's why, I'll give it to you this way too. I came home from school as a teenager. And as I said about my father, 6 Bronze Battle Stars, World War II, I walked in the house one day and told him, Dad, we got to fight in Vietnam. We got to stop the domino effect of communism. My dad looked at me, and you know what he said to me? He goes, is that what they're teaching you in school? I said, yeah. He said, that's the biggest bunch of bullshit I've ever heard. Now, here I am. I respected my teachers. I didn't have a bad experience in school. And here's my father telling me they're bullshitting me. Whoa, wait a minute here. My dad looked at me and says, we're not over there to stop communism. He said, you want to know why we're in Vietnam? I said, tell me, Dad, why are we there? He said, we're there because somebody's making big money. Well, I was fortunate. I went over and got to come back, and my dad was still alive. I got to walk up to my dad, hug him, and say, Dad, you were right. And my dad looked at me with a tear in his eye and said, well, son, sometimes I tried to save you, but you got to learn the hard way.
Wow. Wow.
And so I'm anti-war. There is no justification for these wars, none whatsoever. I can't figure out why we fight them. I mean, the Iraq war, that was allegedly for revenge on 9/11. I thought that's what Afghanistan was. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Why were they involved?
How do most Americans feel about this war in Ukraine right now?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Most of them support it.
Yeah.
You mean Ukraine and I do too, because here's my position and why I came out against it, because I don't care. I know all this stuff that, NATO was pushing in on Russia, and that has Putin upset and this, that, and whatever. But there is no reason on this earth that can justify Putin invading that country and the killing that is going on there right now. There is no excuse he can give me that justifies what's happening there.
You met the man. He walked across the room to shake your hand.
Yes.
What was he like?
I can't figure out the guy I met and the guy who's there now. And by the way, I was taken off the air because of the U.S. sanctions. Russia didn't take me off.
Right.
It was the U.S. sanctions that caused RT to go bankrupt. They couldn't use the banks, and they couldn't do anything, so they had to declare bankruptcy, and I lost my job. Do you know that? Let me tell you this story. That's the second job I've lost because of war. You want to hear the first one?
What was that?
The first one is when I came out of office as governor. I was the hottest commodity out there. MSNBC, Fox, and CNN got in a bidding war for me. MSNBC won. I'm supposed to have Rachel Maddow's spot, but I don't. You want to know why? Because I was against the invasion of Iraq. They were building up my show. We're getting ready to go on the air in 2003, and we got a phone call. And the phone call went to one of my subordinates like this. Is it true Governor Ventura doesn't support the invasion of Iraq? My subordinate said, no, he's vehemently opposed. He's a Vietnam veteran. He said, this is Vietnam all over again. No way should we be going into Iraq. Second question, does Connecticut know about this? Well, you had to do your homework. MSNBC at the time was owned, the MS stood for Microsoft, and NBC was owned by General Electric, who's a massive war contractor. They stood to make unbelievably big money with the Iraq war. Then they got to question number 3, the big one. They said, is there any chance he changed his mind? And my subordinate said, I don't think so. He said, I've seen the governor change his mind, but only when he was ignorant on something and he became read up on it, became more intelligent, he may take a different viewpoint then. But this is war. It has nothing to do with being a governor. He's a veteran. He's opposed. No, he ain't going to change his mind. Well, guess what happened? I wasn't allowed on the air, and they paid me all 3 years, but I couldn't do any cable shows, and I couldn't do any news shows because I was under contract. They stifled me. And they also did it. They had just brought back Phil Donahue from daytime. Phil was their highest rated show. Phil likewise opposed the invasion of Iraq. They pulled Phil. Have you ever heard of a network pulling their highest rated show?
No.
Never.
No. Wow.
That's what went on. That's why I want you Brits to know that, and I want Americans to know what went on prior to the Iraq War. There was nobody here allowed on TV to speak out against it.
And
they made sure of it.
And this is kind of pre-internet, so it was hard to get messages out in any other way, right? I mean, back then it was the television channels and the newspapers, and otherwise it might as well not have happened, right?
Well, this was 2003.
Yeah.
This was 2003.
So yeah, not that much exposure, no YouTube at that point or anything. Wars are good at getting presidents reelected, if you look at it, and at making a lot of money with military-industrial complex. And they traditionally do that very well. So it's no surprise that Biden pops up in Ukraine and is doing all that because it will help him get reelected, and it's making a lot of money from arms dealers in America, right? That's what it's doing.
Oh.
And unfortunately, there's a terrible human toll. I mean, it's not far from here, Governor, to see those people. And it's not far from Europe. You know, it's Europe. And yet these atrocities are happening. It's hard to believe it's happening sometimes right here.
Yeah, and for what?
Yeah,
exactly. For what in the end?
Yeah.
What, if Russia wins, they get to keep Ukraine? What'll be there? It reminds me of the great Gahan Wilson comic that I remember from Playboy magazine. You remember Gahan Wilson?
I don't.
He wrote, well, he was a comic writer, and he wrote all these morbid comics. And he did a full page one where this guy's standing there. It's nothing but rubble all around him in a war zone. Everything is gone. It's nothing but rubble. He's standing there, ripped clothes, all this. And the caption, I'll remember it because I saw it as a teenager. The caption on the comic goes, "I think we won." And the point is, what did you win? There's nothing there. I think we won.
Yeah, yeah. But this is going to keep going because Putin doesn't have a choice. And even though you've met the man, he's probably boxed into a corner in his mind, and this is all he can do, right?
Well, all I know is the guy I met 5 years ago, I believe wanted to have a relationship with the United States at the time. He walked across the room to me, held his hand out, addressed me as governor, and said the simple word, "Thank you." And I said, "Well, you're welcome, Mr. President. For what?" "Thank you for being on RT." And he said, "And I can assure you, no one will censor you. You have freedom to say whatever you want." And I said, "Well, I greatly appreciate that. And all I can tell you, to the best of my knowledge, for the 4 years I was on there, they never censored me." Wow. And like you said, look at that last day where I came out boldly saying I was opposed to this invasion.
Right.
And I guess it aired, right?
Yeah. And interesting, like you said, the U.S. shut that down. That'll get everybody thinking a little bit.
I was shut down because of United States sanctions.
Right. You mentioned censorship. I want to ask you about censorship because in 2020, Governor, I was in this studio on April 6th of 2020, having a conversation in this suit with someone right here in my studio. And it was live streamed on YouTube, and we were the second largest live stream in the world. We had 65,000 concurrent people watching us. The highest live stream was Trump that night doing his coronavirus briefing from the White House. And we spoke for 3 hours, and my guest asked questions about lockdown, pandemics, PCR tests, masks, where the virus came from. And 30 minutes later, by the way, that episode would have been the most watched podcast in human history. It would have been gone to be 40 million times based on extrapolating those numbers. 30 minutes later, that video was deleted and banned on YouTube. First time it happened in 9 years I've been doing this. And first time I ever got censored, Governor. And I thought the weirdos got censored. All the weirdos are the ones that get censored until it happens to you. And we had a battle for 3 months and continue to battle with these companies trying to take our content down.
So let me ask you, Frank, did you look in the mirror and assess whether you're a weirdo or not?
It's Brian, by the way. And I asked, I'm from America. And so I had a visceral, angry reaction to that, Governor.
Yeah.
You know? I guess I am a weirdo. I thought, I'm sitting in the studio with a 65-year-old man who lives on an Isle of Wight in a one-bedroom house. We weren't trying to overthrow governments, incite violence, anything. He was just asking some interesting questions. At the same time, Governor, there were a bunch of people on YouTube with theories that the earth is flat, and their videos were allowed to stay. And again, it's none of my business if you think the earth is flat. Then why can't these other people have these ideas? So I got a real crash course, maybe Bud style, into what the technology companies are doing, what media is doing, and this strange co-opted area of pharma, tech, government.
You want to hear my story on
Yes,
it?
yes.
Come to the United States and try to get a copy of Conspiracy Theory. You can't.
Your book.
No, it's been erased. Mancow, who's one of the biggest disc jockeys in Chicago, he had all the conspiracy theories on his computer, whatever he had at home. He came home one day and they were all erased, wiped clean. He went ballistic over the air. They took my conspiracy. You in Britain now, or where you're at, you can still get conspiracy theory. You can find it. United States right now, you cannot. And get this, that was a highly rated show. It's the only show I know of that there has never been reruns ever shown of it. They do that with every show. If any show gets ratings, right, they always show reruns. Hell, you watch now, Andy Griffith, they show the same episodes every week for 5 years now of a show that was on 35 years ago.
When did you become the weirdo when it comes to that? You always were fascinated with the JFK situation. You had your own show, Conspiracy Theory. But when did you start becoming the guy that was the weirdo, the guy that got censored?
Well, probably I would say with JFK here in America. If you come out and you don't back Lee Harvey Oswald killing John Kennedy, excuse my French, but shit's going to happen to you.
Still, to this day?
Oh, God, yes.
Wow.
Oh, yes. Look what happened to me with that whole Chris Kyle thing.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing
that. Was the
about
biggest setup there ever was. That was to destroy me, to destroy my credibility. I went to court. The judge found and the jury found in my favor that he lied. It never happened. And then the Court of Appeals took it away from me. 3 judges who never even heard a word of the trial took it away.
So they were trying to character assassinate you.
Yeah.
To quiet down other views.
And the only way they could do it was to find another Navy SEAL who was equal to me, apparently, to kill my credibility. The whole thing never happened. And imagine how overwhelming the evidence was when you got the guy who wrote the book tragically died. So you got a dead war hero. His wife is the widow's in court. He brings in 6 of his guys in uniform to testify on his behalf. And yet the jury still found for me. How overwhelming must that evidence have been for the jury to do that?
Wow. And there was allegations that you had gotten into a fight with them or something like that, and then...
Yeah, that I was out in Coronado at McPee's, the team bar out there, and that I said derogatory things about the SEALs. I'm one of them. I was out for a graduation ceremony of Class 258. I'm Class 58. That's a tradition. I was out there for my bicentennial class graduation. And then he said I said horrible things. And at first he said he decked me and knocked me out. Well, then he had to change the story because he realized he just assaulted a former governor and he could go to jail. So then he changed the story saying I swung first and he was defending himself. I can assure you, as a former pro wrestler for 15 years, I have never swung and hit anyone in a bar. Why would you? You're going to get sued. You're going to lose all your money, everything, because they're going to nail your ass. You have self-discipline. I've never hit anybody in a bar, ever. Well, not in the United States, I'll say that. I hit a few overseas, but not here.
I want to actually...
See, I'm honest.
I appreciate that. I want to ask a little bit about the wrestling, but I want to finish this topic first. So you're saying that if you delve in these conspiracy theories, if you talk about things that still mainstream everything doesn't want you to talk about, you're going to get pushback in all ways, shapes, and forms.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I would tell you this. I think doing conspiracy theory...
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.